Welcome to Kairos Research Center podcast. Christian faith seeking understanding, intellectual witness, and spiritual renewal.
Well, having talked about this harmonization and given example of how they could be reconstructed together, I think I just want to add one caveat, and that is the harmonization I give is just an exercise. To show it is possible, let us not jump to the conclusion that they just contradict one another and then brush them aside. Yes, harmonization can be done, as I have tried to show, but I also am willing to say, even with the sequence of events I've given, doesn't mean to say that it must have happened exactly like that. Because I think it should be clear, I'm working with incomplete data. The records are selective. They're non-comprehensive report. So to force them into harmonization artificially would be self-defeating. Sometimes when we read Bible passages, we find to an amazing account, 90% of them seem to gel together. But there could be 10% gaps, I think for any lawyers in court, we will say this is proven beyond reasonable doubt. So the gaps itself, sometimes, if you are willing to accept gaps without trying to force everything artificially, doesn't mean it is fatal. The presence of the gap doesn't mean it's fatal to the reliability of the text. And therefore, I think I keep in mind this caveat that the gospel records are always presentations from a different angle. And in fact, I can argue it's actually a virtue that they seem to be they don't automatically gel with one another, the gospel records. The evangelists, in a sense, give diverse accounts, which shows, in that sense, their independent use of sources, the independent from one another. And when they agree, all the more, it is stronger in the historical reliability. So, with this caveat in mind, I just summarize this resurrection harmony by highlighting a few points. One is the gospel agree on certain points, which I think is beyond doubt historically. Jesus was dead. Jesus was buried. Secondly, the disciples were not prepared for Jesus' death. They were overcome with confusion. Thirdly, the tomb was found on Easter Day, on Easter Monday itself. So the tomb itself, I want to add, does not itself prove the resurrection. After all, Mary thought the body was stolen. So something has to happen more than beyond the empty tomb. And that one, I suggest, is because the disciples beyond the empty tomb also reported they encountered Jesus. Jesus appeared to them as someone who has risen from the dead. And so all this happened without any prior expectation, both for Judaism in general at the time and also for the disciples in particular. And all these things happened in Jerusalem where Jesus was buried so that the disciples could easily be refuted if the claims were not really founded on historical facts. So I will urge those skeptics who have their doubts on the records to take a closer look at the records, be open-minded, and then I suggest you will be surprised that the historical facts could be cogently argued and cohere together that will give us confidence in asserting the empty tomb and that Jesus really has risen from the dead.
Okay, in the narrative of the four Gospels, so it seems like there are a lot of incidents of appearances of Jesus to the disciples. So are the appearances of Jesus subjective experience of the believers?
Of course, the suggestion that the appearance could be subjective is very attractive to the critics. If they're subjective, they are hallucinations, so to say. Jesus never really rose from the dead. But I would want to say, no, so far all our discussion and analysis of the report suggests that the appearance of the resurrected Jesus Christ were objective. They were never presented as subjective experience. They were never depicted as psychological visions. And they were neither bear any semblance of dream or sleep. So, it was more than subjective. Something happened even if we cannot explain everything. But we have an idea, clues about what happened, what's the nature of Jesus' appearance, based on the records that we have deemed to be reliable, worthy of consideration. Notice the initiative of the appearances always rested on Jesus. He took the initiative to appear to them, whether individuals, several individuals, or to a group of 500. And then they were reported to have taken place within a very specific 40 days periods. After that, the appearances of the risen Jesus stopped. And the Greek words used to describe the appearances are very interesting. The word Ophthe, O-P-H-T-H-E, means he appeared. So the initiative came from him, he appeared. Phaneroo, P-H-A-N-E-R-O, Phaneroo, to reveal. He revealed himself. And then Harao, which is the aorist of the word Ophthe, is an aorist passive, meaning Jesus permitted himself to be visible, or God permitted Jesus to be visible. So, in a sense, Jesus appeared, he made himself appear. He was not sighted only. He made himself appear to the unbelievers, I call them, because they were not expecting it to happen, or rather they were destined to become believers. And so, very interesting. So Jesus appeared in different places in all these times. And Jesus also seemed to appear to the disciples in bodily form. I will give details of how this bodily form was like. But interestingly, bodily would mean something material, but at the same time, Jesus' body seems to be no longer bound by the limitations of space and time. And then, finally, there is continuity between Jesus' body before the resurrection and how he appeared after the resurrection. Meaning, when the disciples saw the resurrected Jesus, they recognized him. There is continuity in the recognition and identity of Jesus. And Jesus could show them the marks of his suffering. So, it has to be a bodily resurrection, in other words. So what is the nature of Jesus' resurrection? It wasn't just spiritual. Sometimes we always think our pagan culture after death must be like spirit But very interestingly, Jesus was reported to be bodily raised from the dead. And of course, Paul himself in the preaching preaches a bodily resurrection. When Jesus said he was buried and he was raised. Burial means he actually died. People start crying when there is a burial, not at the wake itself. Because this is really dead, A person isn't really confirmed dead unless the person is really buried for 3 days already. So, when he could not have a reason if he didn't die. And so, but because he was buried and the tomb was empty, it has to be a bodily resurrection. So, Peter also preaches the bodily resurrection. When I mentioned, he compared the empty tomb of Jesus, supposedly, and the tomb of David. So all four Gospels speaks about a bodily resurrection. And this happens right from the beginning at the earliest stage of the proclamation of the early church.
So it seems like Jesus' resurrection body possessed both material and immaterial qualities. So what are the implications of this resurrection body for our understanding of the resurrection?
So what is the nature of Christ's resurrection body? When you have a body, you're a spirit. That means you must have some impressions in the physical sense. So we have a report of Jesus eating, showing his wounds. So it's a body resurrection. So while his body, natural body in a sense, is physical, at the same time, interestingly, the body of Jesus seemed to be displaying new wonderful powers different from ordinary natural body. So, for example, Jesus has materialistic qualities. He ate fish to show his disciples that a spirit cannot eat, but I can eat. And not because he was hungry, but to demonstrate his corporeality, his bodily resurrection. But at the same time, it was non-materialistic. What do you mean by that? We read in the account, Jesus suddenly appeared and suddenly disappeared. He can, so to say, materialize and localize at will. So in a sense, it's a very unusual body. We call it the glorified body, So there is mysterious power of the risen Christ. which shows is corporeal and yet is material and immaterial. He could pass through closed doors. The disciples were gathered in the room, closed because they were scared of the authorities coming to arrest them. And Jesus suddenly appeared to them. Now, of course, what that means is, interestingly, so how do we relate this materiality and non-materiality? To the extent that Jesus was seen when he allowed himself to be seen. Ophthe, he came into visibility. Would mean that generally, without him allowing it, without him permitting it be, if our natural eyes will not see him. But he allowed himself to be seen. His essential state of existence will be now that is invisible to our normal eyes. But he can allow himself to be seen. He's not limited by physical restriction. In that sense, sometimes you ask, why was the tomb rolled away? Was it to let Jesus out? No. The tomb was rolled away not to let Jesus out. He could pass through the empty tomb, pass through the tomb. But the tomb was rolled away to let the disciples in, so that they could see that the body is no longer there. So, in that sense, Jesus' resurrection displayed new properties. He was resurrected, his body, and yet not limited. And to the extent he displayed great powers, he was exalted, is the phrase used. He now shares the glory of that he had before the incarnation, which now and then in his grace he may show to us. The closest incident to that might be the transfiguration, where Jesus was bright and glorious, so to say. So I suppose normal human eyes cannot stand beholding the glory of God. And sometimes you veil the glory and allow us to see what our eyes can withstand, so to say. And then finally, related to the resurrection, it is interesting that after 40 days, he was no longer revealing himself. What happened? We read about Jesus ascending to heavens. This is interesting. Is it because Jesus can fly, can levitate, so to say? He can do hyperspace jump, I may put it that way. And he went up to heaven. In order, I would want to say, he has to give a decisive, decisive culmination, a closure of his revelation to his disciples. He can't just say, I disappeared. So he has to dramatize it. He went to heaven, And then that is called the ascension, The ascension actually dramatizes what Jesus already possessed. He was already exalted in heaven. He doesn't receive his glory only when he was dramatized in Acts chapter 1. But he has to dramatize it to tell his disciples, that kind of relationship I have with you has come to an end because I'm now at the right hand of the Father. So, in short, the resurrected Jesus contains continuity and discontinuity with our bodily existence. When he makes himself visible, he can interact with us bodily. He broke bread on the road of Emmaus. He told doubting Thomas, put your finger, and then one part of the gospel say, when they saw Jesus, they hold his feet and worship him. They go grab his feet and worship him. So there is continuity, but there is discontinuity. He does not share the limitations of our physical constraint. And then, of course, most important, his body displayed the glory of heaven, which we can see only to the extent he allows us to see. And that is the greatness of the resurrection. It is not resuscitation. Lazarus was resuscitated, meaning somehow he came to life, he lived a normal life, and then he died eventually. But Jesus was not resuscitated. Jesus was resurrected, meaning he now possessed the glorified body, the glorified existence that he had before the foundations of the world. So, and we in turn will also share the same glorified body. So, this is the promise of the resurrection.